Titled Aldani, Andor's first episode starts to increase in scope as we finally get to see Mon Mothma and the Coruscant side of the series, while also following Cassian as he becomes part of a team planning to steal big from the Empire. First off, I know I mentioned it in my reviews from last week, but I absolutely love this series' opening emblem sequence, and I didn't realize it until now, but it reflects the end of an eclipse, which could be made to symbolize the beginning of the end for the Empire, as these small groups of people begin to work together to finally fight back against oppression. The episode begins with Luthen and Cassian traveling in hyperspace to Aldani, and so far I'm loving everything about the dynamic between these two characters. The acting on both ends is amazing, but so far I think Stellan Skarsgård's performance has been the standout of the series. He adds so much emotion to lines that could just as easily be meaningless when spoken by another actor. The scene where Luthen disproves Cassian's lie about Minbin got a small chuckle from me, but it shows just how important Luthen believes Cassian to be. The little technological box was never the reason he came to Ferrix on such short notice. Luthen knows everything there is to know about Cassian, almost to the point where it's kind of creepy, and he sees potential in him to make a difference, which we know Cassian ultimately does by the end of Rogue One. We then finally return to Coruscant for the first time in what feels like forever. Seeing the planet from space and getting the text on screen alone made me happy, and I would have been satisfied if we were only shown a short scene on the planet. But instead we got to explore a lot about what's happening there with the Empire ruling. We're shown Dedra Meero walking up to the Imperial Security Bureau headquarters, and despite everything we saw in the first 3 episodes, I continue to be astounded by how good everything looks. It was completely realistic, and felt like it was actually there on the planet. The music also helped add to the tone of the scene, as we were introduced to this new villainous organization for the first time. While the music and sound didn't have as jarring of an effect on me than in the previous episodes, the faint music played in the background of the specific scenes, like this one for example, immediately set the tone for whatever we were seeing, and helped me subconsciously form an opinion on these new characters, before I really knew anything about them. Getting to see inside the ISB was something I never knew I wanted, and the way it was shot was perfectly done. The Empire has always had a reliance on the color white to symbolize their pristine nature and superiority, but personally, at least, the complete saturation of white, as well as the crowded state of the room, is successful in making me as a viewer uncomfortable. It's always shot in a close way where almost every shot is either made to make us feel close up to the individual and almost claustrophobic, or with other agents in the background or foreground as someone is speaking who is presented as lesser or inadequate. Cuts between Blevin and Meero also mirror each other, meaning that their conflict in this episode over the files from Ferrix likely won't be their last. We've seen the Empire before as a looming threat, but we've never gone this close and personal with the small people inside that make the abusive machine possible. While Syril as a villain didn't exactly hit with me last week, I quickly became invested in Meero and her role in the ISB. Both are very similar characters, where they both just want to do as much as they can to fulfill the position that they hold. But Meero has much more confidence and conviction to her, which is a reason I'm drawn more to her as a villain for the series than Syril. I'll also be interested to see how Syril's story is continued after Primor is essentially replaced, and he is now unemployed and forced to move back in with his mother. We only got to see him in 2 short scenes, and this does make me worried about the episodes as a whole moving forward. We now have many more storylines happening than we did last week, with Cassian, Luthen, Mon Mothma, Dedra Meero, and Syril all essentially having their own stories, while occasionally crossing paths. My concern is that there just won't be enough time to focus on each character in a 50-minute episode. Like the first 3 episodes, I'd prefer if it, instead of showing a few short scenes to provide a quick update on a character, to just cut them out entirely and have each episode really develop only a few of the storylines at a time. We're taken back to Cassian and Luthen on Aldani, as we're introduced to some of the other rebels in contact with Luthen. I mentioned before how good the acting is in the series so far, and it really shows in the conversation between Luthen and Vel. We learn a little more about the power dynamic present in this so-called group of rebels, and how they're all different. Luthen is much more pragmatic and unrelenting in his manners, and Vel seems to be the kind of person who wants to prove herself, but still lacks some of the conviction and zeal necessary. And despite the scene taking place on rolling hills that look exactly what I see if I go for a long drive, it still felt like it was taking place on some other foreign planet. I also really like the fact that Luthen gives Cassian a sort of kyber crystal as he begins his journey, just as Jin's mother gave her one as she began hers. It was a nice parallel between two characters that eventually become reliant on each other, although Cassian probably doesn't have his by the time of Rogue One. Once Cassian and Vel arrive at the camp, we're introduced to the rest of the team. I don't think that I ever really attached to them, at least not yet, but them going over the plan to steal from the Imperials, while talking about the natural phenomenon taking place that will cover their escape, made me even more excited for the next 2 episodes, where we'll see it play out, most likely in episode 6. While Cassian is preparing for the mission on Aldhani, we see Luthen slip into a more sophisticated outfit. We had seen the 2 separate appearances of Luthen in the trailers, so I was wondering what exactly it was. But Luthen having a special closet full of nice clothes and jewelry seems like the best thing ever for a person who's the complete opposite of the luxury life. Everything about him is dirty and grimy, with him fighting the Empire in dangerous and partially insane ways, but traveling to the capital of the galaxy, he has to put on this separate persona of a wealthy historical collector. I was so happy to finally see Mon Mothma on screen again, and Genevieve O'Reilly perfectly plays a younger version of the character we see in Return of the Jedi, someone that is much more idealistic and safer. As she says herself, there are people watching everywhere, and she has to be much more cautious when transferring money to Luthen and his rebellious efforts. Speaking of people everywhere, the new driver definitely seemed a little suspicious to me. It's probably nothing, but it was called to attention multiple times because of the way it represents the danger to not only Mon Mothma but those around her, and I think he could turn out to have a bigger role. Or not, who knows. Kleya also seems like someone who could have a larger role, but in her case it seems that she is aware of Luthen's rebellious efforts, and I would love to see her more as a fighter, beyond her just covering as an assistant. Not only was Mon Mothma brilliant in the scene, but I enjoyed going back and finding all of the different connections with artifacts in the background. Something this episode did particularly well was include minor Easter eggs without making them obvious or the focal point. There were a lot of familiar planets mentioned in the dialogue, and we got to learn a little more about Chandrilan culture with Mon Mothma. Mon Mothma then leaves and returns home to her quarters, and like I said before, the music has done an excellent job of furthering the tone of specific scenes. Between the score as Mon Mothma enters the vehicle and is lifted away, and the close-up shot to her face, as an audience we can't help but feel uneasy with everything going on around her. Even though we know she survives the series, it doesn't mean that she won't be put in danger or have setbacks, and those close to her could always be the ones to suffer the most, like a certain husband that was introduced. I know a lot of fans were hoping that she'd have a wife in the series, and while I can't say I prefer one over another, I'm very glad that she has a spouse, because it creates a character very close to her that is unaware of the dangers and stress in her life, which I think will be one of the very interesting things to watch play out. Also, quick shout out to Sly Moore, was one of the first background characters that I ever remember learning about from a Revenge of the Sith sticker book when I was young. I'm very excited to see them appear whenever this dinner party takes place. Aldhani slows the story down to focus on new and returning characters alike, and continues to give fans something to look forward to in the next episode, earning a rating of 8.5 out of 10. Let me know what you thought of the 4th episode in the comments below. Remember to like the video, and subscribe for more reviews like this, and remember to follow me on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. Thank you all for watching, and remember, the Force will be with you, always.